everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. C.J. Farley is the author of 5 novels, including the new young adult novel 0 O'Clock, and a number of nonfiction books, including Before the Legend, The Rise of Bob Marley, and the national bestseller Aaliyah More Than a Woman, which was adapted into a hit movie for Lifetime Television. He co-wrote and co-edited the book The Blues, the companion volume to Martin Scorsese's PBS documentary series. Farley's short fiction has been featured in a number of anthologies, including the Vintage Book of War Fiction and Kingston Noir. A graduate of Harvard, he has won a number of awards, including an NAACP Image Award in 2020. His latest book, 0 O'Clock, is about a teenager in New Rochelle, New York, grappling with the pandemic, who finds herself in the Black Lives Matter movement. The Hate U Give author Angie Thomas said 0 O'Clock is insightful, eye-opening, and inventive. Desmond Hall was born in Jamaica, West Indies, and moved to Jamaica, Queens. He has worked as a high school biology and English teacher in East New York, Brooklyn, counseled teenage ex-cons after their release from Rikers Island, and served as Spike Lee's creative director at Spike Lee DDB. Desmond has served on the board of the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and the Advertising Council, and judged one show, the American Advertising Awards, and the New York City Downtown Short Film Festival. He's also been named one of Variety magazine's top 50 creatives to watch, and lives outside of Boston with his wife and 2 daughters. Moderating the panel will be Pia Catton. She wrote about performing arts and a variety of subjects during her 20-year career as a journalist. She wrote for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, and Art News, among other publications, and has written 2 books, The Comfort Diner Cookbook and Be Thrifty, How to Live Better with Less. Pia is now a fundraising professional based in the nonprofit performing arts, and is a graduate of Kenyon College and Mercerburg Academy. Thank you all for joining us. Pia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's great to be here. And thank you to CJ and Desmond for being here, and all of you participants out there in the audience. We really appreciate that you're here supporting the Newburyport Literary Festival. So I'm going to kick it off with just asking our panelists to give us a little overview of your books, and if you could put the book in context of your career. And is this book a departure for you, or is it a kind of, on a continuum of either a character or a setting exploration that you're working with? Would either one of you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Okay, thanks.
The only reason I wrote 0 O'Clock is I was sitting around my house working another book, happened to turn on the TV, and I see 60 Minutes is around the corner from me, doing a story on New Rochelle as the epicenter of this new epidemic of COVID-19. And I thought to myself, I don't think I really want to have other people tell the story of my community. I think I want to tell the story myself. And I'd already been sketching out doing something on it. So I just plowed full speed ahead with writing this book, 0 O'Clock, which is the story of a young girl dealing with the pandemic and then finding herself in the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, part of the reason I did it is because, I thought this was a story that I wanted to tell from the inside out and not have others sort of project their fears, insecurities, stereotypes on what was going on. I've been writing young adult fiction for a bit now, so this was part of what I do, but I was glad to get it out there in the world.
Thank you. Desmond, how about you?
Yeah, there are a lot of, I guess, sort of personal reasons. This is my first book. I'm the rookie. CJ is the All-Pro Hall of Fame vet. This book, Your Corner Dark, is sort of based on a little bit of pain where one of my uncles was executed. He was in the business, we'll call it, back in Jamaica. And it caused a lot of problems in the family. It caused, in particular for me, it was issues with my mom and myself. And we never really settled them until she died before we could settle them. And so the story is about, a lot of sort of inspired by a lot of several family members who made unenviable choices to go into the runnings, and outcomes weren't good. But I definitely wanted to get this story out on a personal reason, but I also wanted to tell the sort of the complexity of Jamaica as I saw it or as I could. And yeah, so that's sort of the inspiration.
So it sounds like both of you were inspired by events that you knew you were watching take place, unfold immediately around you, or that you had a family member deal with. Is there a character in these novels that really is kind of reflective of your experience? Or is it that the entire book is reflective of your experience?
Well, it's funny. When I started out, it kind of was about this kind of middle-aged couple living in the suburbs, dealing with various issues. And then I came to realize, the most interesting character here really is the teenage girl. And I think as a writer, you have sort of periods where you kind of know what you're talking about when it comes to teenage life. When you're in your teens or 20s and you're writing a book, and later when you have kids around that age and you're able to sort of drive them to basketball practice and to track practice and help them with homework, and you're helping them throw parties, and you're with them all the time, and you're picking up the language. And I figured if I was going to write about teenagers again, this is a good time to do it, because I have two teenagers. I have one who's now a freshman in college, another one who's a junior in high school, and I wanted to write a book that sort of reflected their experiences, that went through things they were going through, and I was seeing how much the pandemic was costing them. I mean, for adults, this is a bad period. It was a bad period in their life, and we've gone through other bad periods. And sadly, we probably will again. But for kids, this was like a quarter of their life. This was their high school lives. This was their middle school life. This was most of their college lives, and it was a lot for them to deal with, and it cost them in terms of like track practices and proms and first dates, and just all these other core formative experiences we all took for granted. We went through them. They didn't get to do it because of the pandemic. And I wanted to write a book about that, because I realized if you write a book like this a year later or 2 years later or 10 years later, looking back, you miss out on the details. You miss out on the experience of what it was like to actually go through it. It's kind of like when you have a crazy dream, when you first wake up, it all seems to make sense. And a few hours later, you're like, why was that turtle flying? What was happening there? It makes no sense. I wanted to capture it when the turtles were still flying. Yeah. I wanted to make sure I got the absurdity of what we went through on the page when it was fresh to me. So that's one reason I wrote the book, and that's one reason why I wrote it now.
Desmond, could you give us a little bit more about your personal connection to your book?
Sure. So the characters, I think, are it's one of the main strong points of the novel. And Frankie, is a high school senior. He is full of enthusiasm and positivity. And he really encompasses that sort of can-do spirit that permeates Jamaica. A lot of, there's a comic that would do a joke about, like, if you ask a Jamaican to build you a spaceship, the question would be, what color? It's just that this idea that you can like pull anything off, you can make it, is really strong, and Frankie embodies that. And I thought that was really important to put out there for teens, because at that point in your life, insecurity is everywhere, and you're just not sure about anything at all. And Frankie goes through this with as much enthusiasm as he can. But, the way his fight, I think, is a really important thing. I also have to say Jamaica is a character in the book. When I was a kid, my parents left the windows open, the doors open at night to catch the night breeze. And, now you go everywhere in Jamaica and there are bars in front of the windows and doors. The crime rate, which is, per capita per measured by per 100,000, is usually among the highest in the world over the last 2 decades. So it's really heartbreaking. But I wanted to show that nuance also, because when I was a kid, it was two American dollars for one Jamaican dollar. Think about that. This little tiny country was doing great, economically, and then a conversion of issues came along that sort of threw the country off track and put it in a debt spiral. And I think that's important to show to kids, especially given, the way things have been said about third world countries. They've been blank hole countries, but they're not. And I think that's important for teens to have a world view, not just to see what happens in their own neighborhoods, on their own streets, but to see what happens in the world and to understand. So I think, those two, Frankie and Jamaica, are my two main characters. And I could go on because there are a couple more that I find really complex, but I think I'm going a little too long.
If I can jump in here, one thing I really found fascinating about your book, Desmond, is the fact that, I'm always impressed when people sort of show fluency in two languages, whether it's like Nabokov or like, or Rilke, where they can toggle back and forth from French and English, and or someone like Marlon James, who's able to write in both English and patois. And you do the same. You show that in this book here too, because people are speaking in patois, but the narrative is mostly in English, and that's really difficult to pull off, especially when you're not sort of living and working in the country where the language is based, because it's all based on like sort of remembering what the patterns were. Because I remember when I did a book about Bob Marley, I had Marlon James actually read it over for me to make sure I was getting the patois right. Because what do I know? I grew up in upstate New York. I was born in Jamaica, but I don't remember a lot of the language construction. So, but you do a great job of pulling it off. And it sounds even better on audiobooks. That you have a narrator who was Jamaican born, I noticed, and he does a great job of narrating the voices.
Oh,
yeah, he's a great actor. But thank you for that. Yeah.
Desmond, did you have a choice in who read the book?
My agent presented him to me, and I thought he was great. I took him to my kids. Well, I played the sample for my kids, and who are both teenagers, and they gave him the thumbs up as well. Because, to CJ's point, finding that sweet spot where, it's intelligible to a non-fluent, crowd and audience is important, right? I remember I went to see Marlon James when he spoke at Harvard, and a journalist asked him, well, how's the book doing back on the island? And he's like, man, people now have money for no book, and he was, just sort of talking about how he created, a world that can be, understood in America or, around the world, but also is, indicative of how, the language and the mores are sort of, conducted in Jamaica as well.
So since we're kind of on the subject of having children listen or read, we have a question from the audience about involving your children in your process. Did your children read your book? And if so, at what point in the process? And we'll talk a little bit more about process, but why don't we address this question? It's an interesting one. Did you have your children read the book early or later in the process? And that's for both of you.
Well, my kids were sort of intimately involved in the production of this book because one, my daughter drew the emojis that the kids speak in the book, because it turns out emojis are copyrighted. So I thought, oh my gosh, I need to have these images somehow. And she's an artist, so she drew them for me. So I felt that was giving a really authentic connection. And then my son had the great idea to make sure I got things right. I created a Google Doc. So there, his friends, my daughter's friends, my wife's connections could all read the book and leave me comments. And that can be, that can sometimes feel tough as an artist to have people sort of weigh in and say, this isn't right, that isn't right. But it really strengthened the book. Like, for instance, there's one point in the book where there's one of the characters is a football quarterback. And, you know, I play basketball. I ran cross country. I don't know anything about football. I stopped watching it after Colin Kaepernick wouldn't give the brother this job back. So I'm like, done. You guys can take your CTA. I'm just done with it. But having this a kid who was actually a quarterback for the New Rochelle High School team, which is a great team. They won states a couple times. He gave me pointers like, this is what really happened. Here's what really goes on in practice. Here's what he'd probably be thinking. And I was able to integrate that into the book. So it's one of the examples of really having kids weigh in, tell you whether what you're doing is whack or not, really helps you as an artist.
Desmond?
Yeah, I think, you know, first up, my daughters still haven't read the book. They are, you know, they feel a certain way, and I don't know why, but they won't read it. However, I speak to my cousins back in Jamaica all the time, and they sort of keep me up on what's going on. And you know, last I was back, it was 7 years ago, to bury my mom. And you know, while I was there, you know, it isn't just, you know, you kind of get the language and the experience, but you know, the changing, you know, patterns where it became beyond evident. We were at my uncle's house. I'll just tell this story. We're at my uncle's house the night before the funeral, and three men come in with guns, Kalashnikovs. And my daughters are playing with their cousins in the back. My wife is on the couch with my dad and my uncle. And it was, you know, a story where these men had been hunting people to get revenge. And, you know, so this has become a widespread thing on the island. And it's, as I said earlier, you know, it's pretty heartbreaking. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, I have to, you know, write this story and continue to write about the things that are going on the island, you know, beyond the, you know, the sort of glitzy tourism commercials, which are great. And, you know, we need the tourism dollar, but however, there are other things going on. And I think being back, you know, really gives that sense of how things are going, you know. And when you know, to what CJ was mentioning earlier about the language, it's funny, I would talk to my cousins about, you know, what's the new slang, you know, what are kids saying now. And you know, they would give me stuff, but it's, you know, it's interesting to own the vocabulary, but also to own it in a way that reflects, you know, the difficulties of the times.
Since we're talking about process, let's keep going with it. How often do each of you sit down to write every day? And is that your method? Or I guess the larger question is, what amount of time do you allot to your writing?
Yeah, you know, I try to write every day. You know, the key thing is I run into a lot of people who are like, I want to write a book, or someday I want to write a book, or I want to write a novel at some point in my life. And my advice to them is always, you know, just start now. You can't put it off some future date and figure, oh, maybe when I reach 50, I'll write that novel, or you know, when I retire, I'll write that novel. If you put aside time every day, whether it's 10 minutes or whether it's 3 hours, eventually that book will get done. And that's the way, and that's what it's just one step at a time, but it has to be a very deliberate, methodical process. And just magically, suddenly you'll have like 400 manuscript pages sitting on your desk, and you'll think, oh my gosh, I actually finished it. But the process begins immediately. So I try to write every day. I find that, you know, at first when you start a new book, it feels like you'll never get it done, that, you know, why are you putting yourself through this process again? But then a year, 2 years later, suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, it's ready to go out to the agent. I can't believe I actually finished another one. So it's an everyday process. It's a commitment, and I don't view it as a task. I mean, it's fun. It's an escape. It's interesting. It's difficult, you know, like you know, working out every day too. But eventually, it works itself out.
CJ, let me just follow up on that, because I wonder if that is influenced by your work as a journalist.
You know, Yes and no. I mean, I do think the craft of journalism is also sort of an everyday process in terms of uh, developing sources um, uh, over time. You know, back when I was a music critic at Time magazine, one thing I really had a commitment to doing is the long game of going after people who previously didn't want to talk to Time magazine, and over the process of years, courting them to talk to us. It took me about 6 years to get Aretha Franklin to talk to us. It took me about 6 years to get Bob Dylan to talk to us. It took me a while to get Joni Mitchell to talk to us, or Prince and Sade. People who generally didn't give a whole lot of interviews, I would spend time to get them to talk to us. And the Wall Street Journal hadn't talked to Kanye West before I said spend some time campaigning to get him to talk to us back in the day. So I tended to make that an everyday process, whether it's going to a concert, seeing them backstage, sending their manager a note, just developing them over time till finally it will break down the walls and say, okay, come down to Detroit and talk to me. So and I use that same kind of commitment in writing my novels, in that it's an everyday thing. It's over the course of weeks and months and years to sort of pull it off.
That's a great point about goal setting. Thank you, Chris. I might take some of that advice myself. Desmond, how about your process?
Yeah, it's absolutely every day. And it's interesting, you know, when you sit down and you sit there and maybe you write nothing, you know, over like the course of a day, or you write one sentence the next day, or you write two paragraphs the next day, it's still writing, even if you write nothing, because your brain is really working on the story. And not writing and just thinking about writing is writing as well, as long as you're sitting there, because it's not a you know a constant step up, right? It's a broken sort of pattern. One day you'll have nothing, the next day you might have 5 pages, next day you'll have a sentence, next day you'll have 2 pages. But the fact that you do it every day and you maintain the process is key. And I'm a sort of a story structure person. I really believe in, you know, first starting with the character's perspective, and you know I think of that as sort of a bank. Then you just load up that bank with as much information as you can. You know, how they view religion, how they view, you know, life, love, loss, everything. And you could withdraw from that to create obstacles. And that's sort of my process. Is like I love putting characters in successively more and more difficult situations to sort of show their true character, because you know talk is cheap, right? And when you see what they do, you know, in terms of, you know, what the situations are and how they try to overcome the obstacles to get to their goals, that for me really shows, you know, real character.
Well, Frankie certainly encounters a lot of challenges along the way in your book.
Yeah.
But is that connected at all? Or maybe I'll just take a step back. Is the process that you've created for yourself related at all to your work in either advertising or teaching? You've done quite a few different career paths.
Yeah, just can't make up my mind. Yeah, so in advertising, you know, what's really great is the fact that you learn not to be not to wait for your muse. You know, you have to just grind at it, and it's a problem to be solved, and to not make it magical. You know, I think there's a temptation in writing to sort of wait for the right light, you know, the right cappuccino, you know, all the right particular things to get in the mood where you sit down and write. But you can't look at it like that. You know, if it's storming or if it's a beautiful day and you want to go outside, doesn't matter. You just have to sit there and grind. In a way, I think a lot of writing is in the hips. You know, you just sort of land it on the chair and keep them there, and you stick with the story and keep grinding it out, and it'll come to you. You know, it's not a sort of a magical thing with a big secret. It's what it is it's a lot of hard work, and for me, a lot of structure.
Mm-hmm. Let's address structure also, because in both of your books, you're dealing with a young person who is very excited and eagerly awaiting the college acceptance process, or a scholarship in Desmond, in your case. I mean, that is so much anticipation. So that's one, just one of the points where you guys have in common in your stories. And I just wonder where that decision to make that such a pivotal moment for the young person as the main character. Why did you choose that?
Well, one reason I did that is because I've seen people go through the process. It's funny, when I started writing this book, the main character just dreams of getting into Columbia. It's all she wants. It's what she sort of set her sight on, and she eventually gets in. And spoiler alert. And there's a big sort of cathartic scene where she's dancing around and she gets into her university of choice. The weird thing is, my son, when I was writing the book, was thinking about applying there, and then later did apply there and got in. And the same scene played itself out in real life, which is kind of weird to have sort of life reflecting art. And so, for anyone who's out there, I'm not saying that my book will help your kid get into an elite university, but it might not hurt for you to buy this in bulk and send it to your friends. I'm just saying.
Always worth it, worth a try.
Love it.
Desmond, your character is dealing with so much in addition to waiting for the scholarship.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There's a scene where Frankie does a happy dance when he, gets the news himself. And I think, it's an interesting thing, right? The amount of anxiety that's out there and the amount of pressure that we put on teens, right? Their brains are not developed yet fully. And yet they have to make these decisions that alter their lives completely. I see it in the classroom. I've seen it with, kids I've counseled. I know it from myself. I didn't get into my dream college, which, is stuck in my craw forever. And now I'm going through with it with my oldest daughter, who's a junior, who is, looking around for, the right place to go that will make this huge decision and then, have these huge consequences on her life. So that anxiety, I thought, was key. And then when you think about it in the context, again, to bring it back to Jamaica, jobs for young people are really difficult to get. About a month ago, the government started programs to employ young people just to keep them out of crime. And, that's when you think about that, right? Why does an intelligent group of kids turn to, a very difficult way of making a living and a way to actually shorten your life? It's because the opportunities are very scarce. So I think, showing this great opportunity and showing what can happen even to a good kid when, when the circumstances are, very tough and something he just can't overcome is very important. And I think it's instructive to kids here in America and around the world as well, who may have more privilege. It's important for them to see that, you can't take this stuff for granted, and you really have to, make hay and take advantage when you can.
I want to say one other thing about the college process is one reason why it sort of has a presence in a couple of my books, including the last one, Around Harvard Square, is the fact that anyone who has kids understands that the whole process is completely corrupt and broken. There is too much pressure on kids to get into these elite universities. The fact is, whether you get your first choice or your fifth choice, your life is actually pretty much going to play out exactly the same, and it might even play out better. Because I've seen so many people that didn't get into their first or second choice, it lights a fire under them, and they become much more successful people because they play with like anger in their careers, and they're even more driven because of that, or they just have a better experience at the other college they went to. So there's that too. And also because of these crazy college rating systems, all the colleges are trying to game the system, show they're more exclusive than the other college, and they're trying to attract more applicants, and that drives down the acceptance rates makes them look even more exclusive. And so really talented people get lost in the shuffle because they get so many applications, tens of thousands. There's no way they can actually accurately assess them all. And so you can have like a 4.2 average, incredible, scores on your standardized tests, be president of your student council, and still not get into the school of your choice, just because maybe they didn't have a chance to really accurately assess what you're about. So it's a completely corrupt and ridiculous system. One reason I played out my books is to show people that other folks are going through the same kind of anxiety-inducing process and maybe give them some comfort. But first, second, third choice doesn't really matter. Go for it. Apply to the school of your dreams. Do everything you can to get into it, but realize that it's not really going to affect your life long-term for most people.
Mm-hmm. So each of you has now raised a message that you wanted to convey to the young people reading your book. Do you also feel like there is a way in which, as a author of young adult fiction, you're helping to shape the young people's minds or giving them a message? I mean, what extent, to what extent do you want to include an important message that the young readers need to read in addition to the storytelling?
Well, I guess I'll jump in and talk about that. I don't have a collapsible message that can be summarized in a few short sentences. If I did, I would have tweeted it out and I wouldn't have written a book. And I think that's part of the reason that books are so important, is that so often the information that people are getting these days is through social media. It's condensed, it's summarized, and it's not up to the task of confronting the huge systemic problems we face today, whether it's climate change, whether it's the rise of Trump and his band of demagogues who are still lurking over the American landscape, whether it's what's happening in Ukraine and Russian aggression. There are all these huge issues that we're facing, voter suppression, and just tweeting it out isn't enough. You have to write a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, to really get into all the nuances and explore ways in which perhaps we can fight our way to some sort of solution. So that's part of the reason why I write books, to deal with those bigger kinds of questions and grapple with those bigger and try to find those bigger answers.
Desmond, how about you? What's the balance for entertainment and education?
Yeah, so being in the classroom for a few years, you can't preach to the kids, right? It just does not work. So I create and I, like myself, very dramatic stories that are exciting, with a lot on the line, with big time stakes. And I think, by telling the story, kids are not dumb. They completely get it, and they are awesome truth tellers. They have their front, like I said, their frontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. So they're letting you know. So when you tell a story and you tell it dramatically, and you talk about, important things, they will pick it up and they will get it. And I find that to be really important. And when kids chime back, on social media, as they've done, and they tell me that, they like the book, that was one thing. But when they get like the insight into Jamaica, into the politics, and I think, with the story of Frankie, it's set in an election year, a fictive election year. And I purposefully put this fictive year in there to really show, this process that can be corrupt and, very painful for a lot of people. And, we happened here in the US to have gone through a very difficult election cycle, a few years ago. So I think kids have picked up on that, and that is like sort of really important to me. But again, the entertainment comes first. You know, I talk to my daughter, in particular, my youngest one, my super soccer star. She's like, if you don't get me in the first two sentences, I'm gone. Sorry. So, you know, you don't have much time to hook them. And I think hooking them is important. And when you layer in the important stuff, they'll get it.
I should also say one reason why I write books for young people is the fact that so many of the books that are the most important to us in our lives are things we read as kids. Whether it's The Catcher in the Rye or The Lord of the Rings or the autobiography of Malcolm X or Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. A lot of these books are books we read when we're younger, when we're kids, and that's when they have the most effect on building our worldview. And so I think that's one reason why there's so much activity in places like Texas and elsewhere about banning certain kinds of books, about making sure people can't read about critical race theory, even if they're not really teaching it in high schools. Because there's such fear that if kids read books that have expanded their worldview, that maybe they'll become more empathetic, contributing citizens when they grow up. And there's this hunt to stop it, because that's what books do. They open up your worldview. They allow you to see the world through other people's eyes, and there are forces out there that want to stop that. So I think it's very important to write these kinds of books, not with billboard messages, but with ways that allow people to see the world in different kinds of ways and take them to different places, whether it's Jamaica or India or someplace else. And that's why I think YA fiction is so desperately important in these times, to have perhaps pointing us towards a better future if kids are able to see the world through these different eyes.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a beautiful message from both of you. Really appreciate that. So we have a question about the publication process, and we have about 5 minutes, so I thought I'd jump over to that. How did you know where to take your finished manuscript? And how did you get to the point of having an agent? What did that process look like? Desmond, do you want to go?
Jump in there? So for me, I went to Grub Street, one of I think the best writing schools in the country, and I went through their novel incubator program with the amazing teacher Michelle Hoover. And it's a year-long intensive. It's sort of an MFA without the title. But what you do that you don't do in the MFA is you just really workshop your book. And I wrote it several times and then took it to the Muse in the Marketplace, which is the #1 writing conference in the country, where there are a lot of agents and editors. And I brought the book there and I pitched the book. And some agents had requests to read the full manuscript. I sent it to them over a 2-year period. I got one agent that wanted to represent me. And then after that, I called a writer friend, and she was in the hospital, on the bed, about to deliver her child. And she said, "Do not sign anything. You have to meet my agent." So I sent it to her agent, and she sent me 5 pages of single-space notes. The other agent had said, "Oh, we'll just send it out as is. It looks great." But when I heard 5 pages of single-space notes, I was like, that's where I want to go. That's good hands.
So you wanted the feedback. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So then from there, my agent sent the book out, and I got 3 offers in a week, and I signed with Caitlin DeLuey at Simon and Schuster, and I love her. I think she's sort of like the Bill Belichick of editors in YA. I have to say, I think she's just fantastic, and so that's sort of been my process.
I just also want to point out on the book cover, I think you made a great choice, because this dent in the book, in the bullet hole, really cool. That's a bullet hole, and there's a little indentation. It takes a lot for a publisher to agree to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I get that in the paperback. Do I have
Oh yeah, gotta get the hardback. Gotta get the hardback. I did a book where we wanted to insert a tiny penny because it was a book on thrift, and it was a really big deal to get that penny on there. They had to fight for it. CJ, how about you?
Yeah, with me, well, the two parts of this process, I was on the Harvard Lampoon when I was in college. And so I basically just asked another editor there, hey, you work for Letterman. Do you have an agent? He said, sure, send your book to my agent. He'll figure it out. And then ended up getting sent to Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and then published. And I later had a series of publishers after that. But before that is really what's important for most people is that, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, grew up in Brockport, New York, which is upstate New York. And my parents taught at the State University of New York at Brockport. So it's really rural, no one even knows where it is. And so I always wanted to get published. I thought, how do I get a book published from Brockport, New York? And the way it worked is I was on my school newspaper. I did a lot of internships at the Globe and the Chicago Tribune. And I took a lot of classes where I met professors and talked them up. And every time there was an event in the area that featured an author, I would talk to them and chat them up. I sent letters out to like John Updike asking him how do I get published. He sent me a letter back actually saying, don't worry if your book doesn't get published because some dumb people read some very good books and some smart people read some very bad books, so it's not a reflection of your intelligence. So after all that advice and help, I finally got help from a fellow editor at the Harvard Lampoon. But I would advise, again, play the long game. If you want to be a writer, meet writers. Go to conferences, go to book readings, meet as many people as you can. Someone's going to help you eventually. It might take years, but you can't just suddenly finish a book and go like, oh, now I want to get it published. Start meeting people, start making contacts, and your network eventually will get you there.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add to remember that when you're published and you pay it forward to someone else, right? I mean, that's one of the most rewarding things is helping someone else too. You've learned from this process, pay it forward. We have one more question. What book influenced each of you the most when you were an adolescent? And we've got about 1 minute left, so if you want to just throw a couple out there.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go get my copy of it.
Okay. While he's going, CJ, do you want to take it?
Yeah, well, my dad wrote a book called The Economics of Latin America. He was an economist. He was the head of his department at the State University of New York at Brockport. And my mother also wrote a book about Reconstruction in New York. And having two parents who were academics and published great books, influential books in their fields, that really influenced me to write the silly YA fiction that I do today. So having smart parents allows the kids to do silly stuff. So that was very influential for me.
Desmond?
So in high school, I had really amazing teachers that would yell at me and they would scream, this is what you can do. You have to read this. Do you understand the significance of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? Explain it to me over. And, they took a lot of time. And, teachers that make differences in lives are like blessed, and I really have to go back to this book. This is the actual copy that I had in high school of The Jungle. And I had no idea that writers could have so much sway in the world. Upton Sinclair wrote this book about the meatpacking industry in Chicago. And from his book came a great deal of, change. He was part of the great muckrakers of the middle of the last century. And I had no idea that writing could actually help people in the world other than sort of on a personal basis. I didn't know it had a broader, geopolitical scope. And so this book, That Jungle, was very important. And I've kept it till this day.
This day, you still have it. I'm very impressed.
This is a great conversation. Thank you again for being here, and we really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.